All right. This is a picture of my mom a couple of weeks ago. She is approaching the end of her life, and her life has been difficult, to say the least. She had an incredibly chaotic and lonely childhood, which led to all kinds of challenges in her life, anger, unpredictable mood swings, and really an inability to connect deeply with others. And this cast a dark shadow over my life with her. About a month ago, she went into hospice care, and I flew to South Carolina to visit her for what I think is going to be the last time. And leading up to that trip, I had this strong sense from the Lord that I was supposed to go there as a messenger of His peace. And in my family, people don't have meaningful conversations, particularly on deathbeds. So I'm like, okay, don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to go. And we had an amazing visit. When I was with her, I spoon-fed her a Wendy's Frosty, which at this point in her life she's got a short list of things that bring her joy, and that's one of them. And then she had the TV on in her room, which I kind of grew up with the TV on all the time. And there was a movie on about sharks. So we watched a movie about sharks. And it reminded me of a time when I was growing up and I was 8 years old, and she took me to see Jaws. If I told you about my mom's chaotic childhood, she didn't always make the best parenting decisions. I was afraid to swim in swimming pools after I saw that movie, and I lived 500 miles from an ocean. And then I held her hand as we watched this movie about sharks. And I had this memory of, actually many memories of when I was a child and she would take us to church. And, 7 years old, I was bored in church. Church, all the 7-year-olds in here, and church is boring, all right? And I would hold her hand and rub her hand to pass the time. And it was just this beautiful moment that we would able to share. And she's had several strokes over the last couple years, so verbal communication she can't do anymore. She can do the nonverbal stuff with her hands and nod her head and stuff like that. So I told her, I had everybody else leave the room, and I told her, I said, I didn't know if I was going to see her again. Like, this might be it. At that point, if you're dealing with somebody at that phase of life, you're like, do they understand me? And I was like, do you understand what I'm saying? And she nodded yes. And I said, I just want you to know that I love you. I absolutely and utterly love you. It was true. I wasn't just saying it because I knew I was supposed to say it. And after she understood that, she nodded her head yes. She said, yeah, I get that. And then I told her that Jesus loved her. And I meant it. I wasn't just saying that because I'm a pastor and it's the right thing to do. And I said, Jesus cannot wait for you to be with him. He is actually looking forward to that day. And again, I genuinely believe this to be true. My mom knows the Lord in some way, shape, or form. Her faith has not been really nurtured at all for a variety of reasons in her life. And I told her, I too can't wait to see you when your burdens and your pains are lifted from you. And I meant it. Like a redeemed version of my mom is just a glorious thing to think about. And it's a new thought for me. I spent most of my life trying to navigate around her, and now I'm like, I can't wait to see you. And she started crying at this point, if you can imagine such a thing. And I was crying too. And I asked her, I said, do you believe me? And she nodded yes. And it was this amazing tender moment with a woman who has not had a whole lot of tender moments in her life. And so I asked her if I could pray for her, and she said yes, nodded yes. And I thank Jesus for how he loved her, how he forgave her, how he forgives me as well. And then before I left, I just knelt beside her chair and I wept for all kinds of things. I wept for a relationship that never was between she and I. I wept for the pain that I had endured, inherited, and I wept for her pain as well. And I also wept with joy at the prospect of seeing her on the other side. So I got up, I kissed her goodbye, patted my heart, and I told her again that I loved her. And she waved to me in her amazing way. And this whole interaction was nothing short of a miracle. Again, my family doesn't do stuff like this. And the Lord just gave my mom that gift, and he also gave me that gift. It was a miracle. And it was a miracle that was so many years in the making. I didn't just walk into that room. It's really the result of God's slow work of shaping and forming me. Through friendships with many of you, through prayer, therapy, spiritual direction, that I was able to go to her as a messenger of the Lord's peace and not an agent of retribution or just kind of numb out and survive the moment. Through God's new creation work in me, the Lord is breaking generational chains of darkness. So every Sunday when we approach the Lord's table together, we as a congregation get to preach. We proclaim. And this is what we say. Together we proclaim the mystery of the faith. Christ has died. Christ has risen. Christ will come again. And I added an exclamation point in there because I think it should be an exclamation point. And I love this. The resurrection of Jesus is at the center of this proclamation. And it is at the center of the Christian story. In our gospel text this morning that Tom read, we're told that the resurrection of Jesus happened on the first day of the week. And some of you might know, well, actually, that's a Jewish way of rendering the weeks, and Sunday is the first day, and Saturday is the seventh day. And that's true. It did happen on a Sunday. But John he's Jewish, but he's also an amazing theologian, and he's doing something deeper with the first day of the week. This language connects back to Genesis 1 and the days of creation, the days of the first creation. God begins his creating work on the first day of the week. And now with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, God has begun his work of new creation, of repairing and restoring everything that is broken. All shall be made well. And he begins this work of new creation on the first day of the week. That's when new creation started, with the empty tomb. The first day of creation in Genesis, the light comes into the darkness. The first day of new creation in John's gospel, Jesus, the light of the world, is risen from the dead. And he shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome the light of Jesus Christ. And I love Mary Magdalene, who's in the story in John 20. You may have heard of her, even if you're not familiar with the gospel. She's not a prostitute. Sorry, Jesus Christ superstar. She's not Jesus' secret wife. Sorry, Da Vinci Code. But if you read what the Gospels say about her, she was a woman who was demon-possessed. And we're told she's possessed by 7 demons, 7 Hebrew number of completion. She was just completely and utterly overtaken with dark and demonic forces. And they had nearly ruined her life. And Jesus rescued her. He delivered her from those evil spirits, and she was put in her right mind. And she was faithful to the very end. And when she's there in John 20 weeping at the tomb alone, she didn't go to see a resurrection. As Jamie said, she went to anoint the dead. She went to honor somebody who was gone. You know, what is she thinking? Are these dark spiritual forces, they're going to come and swallow me up again? I got rescued for a couple years, and now it's going to be even worse. And I also think she's got to be absolutely heartbroken. She trusted him. she faithfully followed him. She and several others were conspicuously there at the foot of the cross when he died, when many of his disciples, most of the men, fled. She had followed him to the very end, and this is how her life works out? She's like, are you kidding me? Was it all worth it? Why have I kept my hands clean? Why have I followed you, Lord? I was faithful to you, and the world and evil and darkness is going to win. Is this what my life is all about? And then the risen Jesus calls her by her name, Mary. So personal, so intimate. He says, I'm here. I'm back. And I see you. And I know you. And I love you. And all will be well. It's a tender moment for a woman who, for most of her life, didn't have a whole lot of tender moments. In the creation story in Genesis, God does a work that only God can do. He creates the heaven and earth in 6 days. And then he invites humans to share in that work. He says, I am the one who hovered over the darkness of the deep and brought life and fullness, and go and do likewise. Spread my life, my light, my fullness throughout the whole creation. And in the new creation story in the Gospels, Jesus does the same thing. And he invites Mary to join him in the work of new creation. Mary is the first preacher of the good news of Easter. To take the message of resurrection to the men who were noticeably absent from the foot of the cross and the tomb that morning. Because the message of the empty tomb is for all of us. Maybe you're like Mary. Maybe you have kept the faith. But you look at your life and you're like, is it worth it? Or maybe you're like Peter and you haven't kept the faith. When things got hard, you caved, drifted, checked out, whatever. The good news of the empty tomb is for everyone here today, the faithful and the faithless. And let me conclude with this. This is a quote by New Testament scholar N.T. Wright, and N.T. does not stand for New Testament, although that would be incredibly hip-hop of Bishop Wright. He says this, the point of the resurrection is that what you and I do in the present, by painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals, digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbor as yourself, will last into God's future. These activities are not simply ways of making the present life a little less beastly, a little more bearable, until the day when we leave it behind altogether. As the hymn so mistakenly puts it, they are part of what we may call building for God's kingdom. And I want to focus on that phrase, that the things that we do in faith will last into God's future. The resurrection seeds that you and I plant today, tomorrow, and in this life in faith, they will bear fruit. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians? Your labor is not in vain because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This means my visit with my mother will bear fruit. I believe that it will last into God's future. Our relationship has been transformed because Jesus Christ has risen from the dead. And darkness doesn't win. The light of Jesus Christ does. So I'm going to invite you all to stand. Then you'll sit down in just a minute, but for now, I'm going to have everybody stand, and we're going to preach this together. So I'll give the introduction, and you need to belt it out. You can go ahead and put it up. There we go. Together, we proclaim the mystery of the faith. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You can be seated.